All right. So this is the second section inside of chapter 1. It's called the background section, or sometimes it's called the background of the problem or the background of the study. Okay? Now, the purpose of this section is threefold. Okay? So when we think of the background, we're essentially looking at this as a mini literature review. A mini literature review because it summarizes the major literature points in your study. Okay? So the first objective of this section is to summarize the research literature related to the scope of the study topic. Okay? And I'm going to go through what we're going to cover as the scope. Okay? Second is to describe the gap in knowledge in the discipline that this study will address. Okay? That's number 2. And the third purpose is to state why the study is needed. All right? All right. So in the first paragraph, we're going to focus on discussing the problem and its origin. So, what is the problem your study will address? When did the problem start? What is the origin of the problem? That's essentially what we're asking here. Number 3, what was the cause of the problem? Who is affected by the problem? You must include references because this is based on the literature. All of these questions are answered based on the literature. Okay? Now, that is the purpose of the first paragraph. That's what we're going to accomplish in the first paragraph. Second paragraph. Describe how the original problem has progressed. Okay? So, specifically, has the problem changed over time? If so, how? Has the problem worsened or not? If so, how? Is the problem more widespread? Okay? Have the person, places, or things impacted by the problem changed or expanded? If so, how? Remember, your answers to these questions, the description of the progression of the problem, are going to be based on the literature. So you must include references. Okay? Third paragraph. And again, you're going to write this paragraph by paragraph. This is just a summary. Paragraph 3. Describe the theoretical or conceptual framework. So, if you're running a quantitative study, if you're conducting a quantitative study, it's going to be a theoretical framework. If you're conducting a qualitative study, it's going to be a conceptual framework. Okay? Now, if you have more than one conceptual framework or theoretical framework, then you would use a paragraph for each one. All right? So, say if you only had one, you use paragraph 3 to discuss your theoretical or conceptual framework. If you're using more than one conceptual or theoretical framework, you would use paragraph 3 and 4, say if you had 2. And then this one would become 5, and so on and so forth. Okay? So these numbers are arbitrary, but generally speaking, you don't want to use more than 2 theoretical or conceptual frameworks in your study. That's generally the limit. That's why I say up here 3 to 5 paragraphs. All right. So here's what we're going to discuss in paragraph 3. Who is or are the creators of the conceptual framework or theoretical framework, and when was it created? 2. Summarize the major components of the conceptual or theoretical framework. 3. Explain how the theory relates to the study. Okay? Why did you use this theoretical or conceptual framework for your study? Okay. And then finally, explain what you expect the results of each of your research questions to be based on the theoretical framework. So, for example, research question 1 says, or the null hypothesis for research question, or research question 1 says, is there a significant difference between children who get breastfed and children who do not get breastfed in weight development, right? And so let's say you're using a theory on mothering or something like that. So you would say, based on the theory of mothering, which you've already described, we expect there to be a significant difference in the birth weight of the babies between those who were breastfed and those who were not breastfed. And you do that for each research question, okay? Because you describe the conceptual framework, you talk about how it's related to your study, and then lastly, you talk about what you expect the results to be of your study by research question based on the theoretical framework, because you're going to use this information in chapter 5, okay? Now, finally, and this goes for if you have more than one. So if you have more than one conceptual framework or theoretical framework, what you're going to do is you're going to follow this pattern for each one. So you would do it for paragraph 3, and then you would repeat this for paragraph 4. Okay? But we're going to assume in this example that we only have one theoretical or conceptual framework. And then in paragraph 4, again, this is assuming we have one conceptual framework. The final paragraph is, what is the gap in the literature that led to this study? So, for example, how did you find the gap? So there are 3 ways that you can find a gap in the literature, okay? One is by a specific study. So, for example, a specific study that is recent may say there is a gap in the literature, okay? Blah, blah, blah. And this is the gap. It may specifically say that. Or it may say something like, future studies need to focus on blah, blah, blah. Okay? So that is one example of a gap. You have to give the example of where you got the gap from. Okay? Another example is from the literature itself. Okay? So one is study focuses, where it tells you this is the specific gap. The second approach is from the literature itself. So you examine the literature, and then you realize after you examine the literature, there is no literature that covers this specific area, right? So you would say, based on an analysis of the literature, we see that the literature covers this, it covers this, it covers this, it covers this, but it does not cover this. Therefore, this is a gap in the literature that this study will address. Okay, that's the second approach. All right. Now, another approach is to look at the literature and just see just a dearth of literature in that specific area, right? So you look for literature, let's say in, breastfeeding or whatever, and you say, wow, there's like almost no literature in this area. You would use that as your argument, right? You would say there is a dearth of literature in this area, therefore more literature needs to be done, and therefore this is the rationale for the gap in the literature. Okay? So, number 3, lack of studies. Generally, that's not going to be the case, but it might be. Okay? Most of the time, it's going to be either a study. A study is going to specifically speak about the limitation of the study, which is a gap, or recommendations for future research, which is also another gap. So that may come from a specific study. That's number one. Or an examination of the literature itself. So let's say we have literature on this subtopic of your topic, this subtopic of your topic, but a particular subtopic that you're interested in has no literature that covers that. So therefore, that is your rationale for the gap in the study. Okay? All right. And then finally, you state why this study needs to be done. And that's it. That's all you have to do in paragraph 4. All right? So this is a summary. And now we're going to go and we're going to start writing paragraph 1. So click next and we will begin writing paragraph 1 step by step.